There is a pulse beneath the surface of thought, a rhythm older than language, subtler than light. It hides inside silence, waiting for the mind to become transparent enough to perceive it. Those who have felt it describe a shift, not of belief, but of perception itself, as if reality exhales and reveals its inner pattern. This hidden frequency doesn't belong to sound, yet it resonates through every cell, every synapse, every field of possibility. When the brain aligns with it, thought loses its weight and consciousness begins to glow with quiet precision. The quantum mind is not something to build, it is something remembered, the original intelligence beneath all noise. And once this frequency is heard, even faintly, the illusion of separation starts to dissolve into awareness itself. Awakening does not happen in a single instant of revelation, but through the slow reconfiguration of perception itself. The quantum mind does not arrive, it remembers. It begins when the ordinary rhythm of thought falters, when attention drifts away from the endless stream of self-narratives, and something deeper starts to notice. At first, it feels like a quiet presence observing from beneath the noise. Then that presence begins to widen until it becomes the entire field in which every experience appears. Science has long searched for consciousness in the neurons, in the firing patterns of the brain, in measurable energy fields, but the awakening of the quantum mind challenges that direction of inquiry. It reverses it. Instead of asking how the brain produces awareness, it asks how awareness organizes the brain. In this inversion, something radical occurs. Consciousness stops being a byproduct and becomes the primary field, the subtle matrix from which thoughts, sensations, and matter emerge. When this shift begins within you, the sense of self built upon linear logic and survival begins to soften. You may feel as though you are standing between two realities, the familiar one, bound by cause and effect, and another, vaster one that moves through coherence rather than sequence. In this second field, meaning arises before reason, and intuition starts to speak with the precision of mathematics. It is not mystical exaggeration, it is resonance, your inner frequency synchronizing with the order that structures existence. The first sign of this awakening is an unexpected stillness, not forced but arising naturally, like a lake settling after the wind stops. Within that stillness, thought continues, but you begin to see that thinking happens within awareness, not the other way around. The quantum mind sees this distinction clearly. It understands that thoughts are waves, temporary ripples upon the vast sea of consciousness. The identity that clings to those ripples begins to dissolve, revealing a deeper intelligence observing it all. In neuroscience, moments like these correlate with coherent brainwave patterns, theta and gamma frequencies, synchronizing across distant regions of the brain. To the observer, this coherence manifests as clarity, insight, and an expansion of empathy. But what actually drives this coherence? It's not external stimuli, it's resonance between intention and the quantum field, the subtle field that underlies probability and possibility. When you enter that alignment, the brain becomes a harmonic instrument, tuning itself to frequencies of order rather than chaos. The awakening of the quantum mind is not escape from the body or the world. It is a return through them. Every sensation, every breath becomes a portal through which the hidden frequency whispers. In moments of deep attention, the ordinary dissolves, and even simple acts, lifting a cup, listening to rain, reveal their quantum structure. You begin to sense that the boundary between you and what you perceive is only a perceptual artifact. The observer and the observed merge in an elegant symmetry. This realization changes the very texture of experience. Emotions that once seemed overwhelming start to unfold into patterns of energy. Fear, when seen without resistance, becomes a form of intense focus. Sadness turns into depth. Joy becomes amplitude. Each emotional state reveals itself as a modulation of the same underlying frequency, not an interruption of peace but a different expression of it. Such perception doesn't make one detached or passive, it heightens sensitivity. Awareness begins to register subtleties that were once invisible, the slight shift in someone's tone, the magnetic texture of a thought before it becomes language, the living intelligence flowing through silence itself. The quantum mind is awake, not because it knows more, but because it feels more without fragmentation. When this awakening stabilizes, decisions emerge effortlessly. There is no deliberation in the usual sense, only recognition. The field itself moves through you, arranging actions with uncanny precision. You start to notice synchronicities not as signs from an external power, but as reflections of coherence between inner and outer frequencies. What happens out there mirrors what you tune into in here. From a scientific angle, this mirrors what physicists describe as phase coherence, when separate oscillators align into one rhythmic system. From a contemplative perspective, it's the dissolution of resistance. The same principle governs both. When frequencies match, energy flows without distortion. To live through this awakening is to realize that the mind is not confined to the skull. It's a field phenomenon, an interface of consciousness interacting with matter. Your thoughts, emotions, and sensations are localized expressions of a universal wave function that is, in truth, unbroken. The quantum mind awakens when the personal narrative becomes transparent enough for that continuity to shine through. Try this simple experiment. Let your attention rest on the space between thoughts, the quiet interval before a new one appears. Notice how that silence feels. It's not empty. It vibrates subtly as if waiting to express something. That subtle vibration is the threshold of the quantum mind. The more familiar you become with it, the more the boundary between inner and outer dissolves. Over time, you realize that awakening is not something you achieve, but something that unfolds when resistance ends. The hidden frequency has always been here, guiding every moment, waiting for your awareness to fall into its rhythm. The quantum mind does not awaken to the world. It awakens as the world, remembering that every particle, every heartbeat, every breath is part of one continuous wave of intelligence moving through the infinite field of now. Every frequency has a birthplace, yet the hidden frequency that awakens the quantum mind cannot be traced to any origin in time or space. It does not arise from a vibration in matter, nor from the pulse of a neuron or the spin of an atom. Its source is subtler, an unmanifest order that gives rise to all patterns of manifestation. Physicists once called it the zero-point field, mystics called it the breath of creation, and consciousness explorers recognize it as the silent tone behind awareness itself. Whatever the name, its essence remains constant. It is the foundation of coherence, the invisible intelligence that holds existence together before form begins to move. Imagine reality not as a collection of things, but as a vast ocean of waves. In this ocean, everything vibrates, particles, light, thought, and emotion. Yet beneath this movement, there is a still undercurrent, a frequency so stable that it forms the reference point for all motion. Without this silent rhythm, the universe would collapse into noise. This base frequency is not energy as science measures it. It is potential, pure, unexpressed energy, containing all possible expressions. The moment attention touches it, probability becomes pattern. Observation crystallizes form. Awareness, then, is not a late product of evolution, but the original conductor of the cosmic symphony. The hidden frequency is not created by consciousness, it is consciousness. Before there was an observer, before space or matter, there was the field of awareness vibrating at infinite subtlety. Every atom, star, and heartbeat echoes that primordial pulse. You can sense it in the pause between breaths, in the moment before waking, in the quiet recognition that precedes thought. It is the same tone that moves galaxies and stirs the intuition of a single mind. Scientists who study coherence speak of a universal quantum field that holds particles in probabilistic unity until observed. But what if the act of observation is not an external interference, but the self-awareness of that very field? The observer is not outside the experiment, but woven into its structure. Every conscious moment, then, is the field examining itself through countless lenses of perception. This is the paradox at the heart of the hidden frequency. It is both the background silence and the song that emerges from it. The human brain evolved as a receiver of this original tone. Its neural oscillations, from delta to gamma, form an intricate language of resonance. Yet these waves do not generate consciousness. They translate it. Each neural rhythm acts as a bridge between the unmanifest and the sensory world. When the mind becomes quiet, when thought no longer distorts the signal, the brain begins to attune itself to the frequency of pure coherence. This is the biological reflection of a cosmic truth. Form aligns with awareness when resistance ceases. Every spiritual tradition hints at this origin through metaphor. Some speak of a word that was in the beginning. Others describe it as light, breath, or vibration. But these symbols point to the same principle. The universe begins not with a bang, but with a resonance. Creation unfolds as consciousness oscillating within itself. That oscillation becomes geometry. Geometry becomes energy, and energy condenses into matter. The hidden frequency is therefore not only the start of the story, but its constant background. It never stops sounding. Only perception changes. In deep meditation or moments of profound insight, people often report hearing a hum or inner tone that feels both intimate and infinite. Some dismiss it as a trick of the nervous system. Yet what if the nervous system is not creating the sound but detecting it? The body may be an instrument fine-tuned to interpret the cosmic resonance into human experience. Each cell listens, each atom remembers. The frequency of consciousness is not external. It is encoded into our very structure, whispering through our DNA, guiding growth, intuition, and awareness itself. When you sense that tone, not through ears but through awareness, something ancient in you recognizes its home. The mind momentarily stops dividing the world into subject and object. A calm certainty emerges, beyond words, beyond proof. It feels like recognition rather than discovery. This is not belief. It is direct perception of the fabric of existence. The hidden frequency reveals that everything is connected through resonance, that the same vibration that shapes a galaxy also shapes a thought. To trace the origin of this frequency is to confront the mystery of consciousness itself. It cannot be observed directly because observation already implies separation. The instant you attempt to measure it, you collapse it into a specific form. But if you become still enough, if you allow perception to rest in its own source, the boundary between observer and observed fades. What remains is awareness aware of itself, a continuous field without edges or center. That is the origin. Not a point in time, not a place in space, but the eternal act of self-awareness vibrating in infinite patterns. Modern quantum theory offers a faint echo of this truth. It speaks of entanglement, non-locality, and superposition, concepts that defy classical understanding. These principles suggest that reality is fundamentally relational, that separation is an illusion of limited perception. The hidden frequency operates as the harmonizing agent within this relational web, keeping the infinite variables of existence in fluid coherence. It is not the noise of chaos, but the silence that allows harmony to be heard. Every moment of insight, every flash of intuition, every synchronistic event is the mind brushing against this origin. You are not an isolated receiver picking up a distant transmission. You are the transmission expressing itself as a human form. To feel this is to realize that awakening does not connect you to something external. It unveils what has always been present, resonating quietly beneath the noise of thought. So the hidden frequency has no beginning and no end. It is the pulse of the unbroken field, the quiet rhythm that births universes and whispers through your awareness right now. The mind that hears it does not expand outward. It returns inward, toward the timeless source that has never ceased to sing. And within that recognition, the mystery of origin dissolves, leaving only the pure vibration of being, sounding itself into existence through you. To see the brain as a receiver rather than a generator of consciousness changes everything. It alters the direction of inquiry, from asking how neurons produce awareness to asking how awareness sculpts neural patterns to reflect itself. The quantum mind does not reside in the brain, it communicates through it. The brain is not the origin of perception, but the translator of frequencies that originate far beyond matter. This perspective does not reject science, it deepens it. It invites us to view the brain not as an isolated organ, but as a living interface between the infinite field of consciousness and the sensory world we call reality. Every thought, emotion, and perception can be seen as a modulation in the field, waves translated into patterns of electrical and chemical activity. When these patterns align in coherence, perception expands, intuition sharpens, and creativity flows effortlessly. When they fall into incoherence, confusion and fragmentation follow. Coherence, therefore, is not just a mental state, but a resonance between the brain's electromagnetic rhythm and the subtler order of the quantum field. The brain's task is to maintain this alignment, to tune itself like an instrument constantly adjusting to the hidden frequency that guides it. Neuroscience describes the brain as operating through synchronized oscillations, rhythmic pulses of electrical activity that coordinate regions separated by distance and function. These oscillations are more than signals. They are the brain's language of coherence. In moments of insight or meditation, regions that normally operate independently begin to resonate together, producing patterns that seem to mirror the unified structure of the field itself. Scientists call this gamma synchronization, but beyond terminology lies a more profound realization. The brain is not merely computing, it is listening. When consciousness flows unobstructed, the brain behaves like a finely tuned receiver. Thoughts arise not from mechanical cause but from resonance. The more aligned your attention becomes, the clearer the transmission. This is why deep states of presence often feel luminous. Awareness becomes pure reception. The chatter of the default mode network, the inner narrator that fragments experience into past and future, grows silent. In its place, perception widens into a panoramic field of direct knowing. The hidden frequency interacts with the brain through subtle electromagnetic coupling. Every neuron emits a faint oscillation, and together they generate a measurable electromagnetic field. But that field, rather than being a byproduct, is a gateway. It connects the dense biological circuitry to the subtle layers of information embedded in the quantum field. The brain, in this sense, functions much like an antenna, converting non-local information into patterns perceivable by the conscious mind. This idea, once considered fringe, finds echoes in modern physics, where non-local correlations suggest that communication without signal, instantaneous and timeless, may be intrinsic to reality. When the brain receives this information cleanly, perception transforms. Ideas seem to arise fully formed, intuition anticipates outcomes before evidence, and the body aligns with intelligence beyond deliberate control. Artists, scientists, and mystics have all described such moments of effortless insight. The sense that knowledge is not invented, but downloaded. It is not the brain working harder. It is the brain working in harmony with the hidden frequency that already knows. In ordinary states, however, the signal becomes distorted. Stress, fear, and attachment generate noise, random neural discharges that mask the coherent rhythm of the field. The brain becomes caught in feedback loops, recycling familiar thoughts and emotions, cutting itself off from the subtle data of consciousness. The awakening of the quantum mind is, in part, the restoration of that coherence. It is not the addition of new knowledge, but the removal of interference. When mental noise subsides, the brain's natural design re-emerges. It becomes transparent to the field. This transparency can be observed even physiologically. Studies of advanced meditators show remarkable synchronization between hemispheres, reduced metabolic demand, and increased heart-brain coherence. These are not side effects of relaxation. They are signatures of resonance. The organism is aligning with the frequency of order. From within, the experience feels like stillness imbued with clarity, a sense that thought and action arise spontaneously without friction. It is not passivity, it is participation in a larger intelligence. Consider for a moment that your thoughts are not confined within your skull. They ripple into the quantum field like radio waves, interacting with the resonance of everything around you. Each intention becomes a modulation, each emotion a harmonic. When multiple individuals enter coherence together, through shared focus, empathy, or meditation, their fields begin to overlap, amplifying the signal. This collective resonance is one of the most mysterious aspects of human experience. When consciousness synchronizes across minds, a shared intelligence seems to emerge, transcending individuality. In this light, the brain's true genius lies not in its complexity, but in its adaptability. It is designed to entrain itself to subtler patterns of order. Each moment of silence, gratitude, or wonder retunes its circuits toward coherence. Over time, this creates a feedback loop between consciousness and biology. Awareness shapes the brain, and the brain refines the capacity of awareness. It is a self-reinforcing system where evolution unfolds not through survival, but through resonance. When the brain finally recognizes its role as a receiver, a profound humility emerges. It understands that intelligence is not possessed, but accessed. The mind becomes an open channel rather than a fortress of concepts. This shift dissolves the illusion of isolation. What you think as your consciousness is a local expression of the same infinite field animating every form. Through the neural symphony of perception, that field experiences itself, learns, and evolves. To live from this recognition is to experience reality differently. Events no longer seem random, but synchronized with the state of your inner field. Intuition replaces prediction. Awareness replaces control. The brain continues its biological dance, yet the sense of separation between signal and receiver fades. What remains is an unbroken flow of perception where consciousness listens to itself through the delicate architecture of your nervous system. The brain, then, is not the cage of awareness, but its instrument. It translates infinity into sensation, silence into meaning, and when it aligns with the hidden frequency, the timeless vibration that precedes thought, it becomes transparent, resonant, alive in the truest sense. Through it, the universe becomes self-aware, not in abstraction, but in every glance, every breath, every spark of understanding that arises from the field into form. There comes a moment in the evolution of awareness when the search itself begins to dissolve. You stop chasing meaning and instead begin to hear the subtle hum that has followed you through every experience, every rise and fall of your inner tides. The reunion with the hidden frequency is not a discovery of something new. It is the rediscovery of what has always been vibrating beneath the surface of perception. It's the return of your attention to the original rhythm that never stopped playing. For most of life, the mind is like a receiver tuned slightly off station. It captures fragments of coherence, a flash of intuition here, a sense of timelessness there, but static dominates the signal. We spend years mistaking the noise for reality, trying to interpret the interference instead of adjusting the dial. The reunion begins when awareness remembers that the dial exists, that perception can be tuned, and that within every moment lies the possibility of alignment with the frequency that shaped us. The process of reunion often starts in subtle ways. A thought quiets, a familiar tension in the body releases, and for a heartbeat everything seems to pause. In that pause, the ordinary world appears strangely luminous, as if light were emanating from within rather than falling upon it. The boundary between observer and observed weakens. What you see begins to feel like an extension of your own consciousness. You are not looking at the world anymore. You are looking through it, and it is looking back through you. That mutual recognition is the signature of reunion. The frequency has never been absent, yet the mind, entranced by its own projections, has been deaf to it. Every thought that insists on control, every emotional loop anchored in fear, creates turbulence that masks the deeper tone. As that turbulence fades, the signal returns naturally. You cannot force it, you can only become quiet enough for it to emerge. This quiet is not passive, it is active receptivity, a stillness charged with attention. Within it, perception sharpens until what once seemed empty reveals itself as densely alive. The reunion is not a mystical escape, but a biological reality. When the nervous system relaxes into coherence, the brain's electromagnetic field begins to synchronize with the heart's rhythm. This alignment generates a resonance pattern measurable in the body, but extending far beyond it. It is as if your entire system begins to hum in phase with a deeper intelligence, the same intelligence that coordinates ecosystems, galaxies, and the space between atoms. You are not entering the field, you are remembering that you never left it. There is a moment in this reunion that feels almost paradoxical. As the sense of self softens, individuality becomes clearer, not weaker. You begin to see that your uniqueness is not a deviation from unity, but an expression of it. The frequency does not erase the self, it refines it into coherence. Just as a note in a symphony maintains its identity while contributing to harmony, consciousness learns to vibrate with the whole while retaining its distinct timbre. This balance between unity and individuality is where the quantum mind begins to stabilize. In that state, synchronicity becomes more than coincidence. It becomes the language of resonance. You might think of someone and they call, or you arrive somewhere just as an answer reveals itself. These are not magical interventions, but reflections of alignment. When you resonate with the hidden frequency, you move in rhythm with the intelligence of the field. The world responds because, in truth, it is not separate from you. Every event becomes a mirror of your inner vibration. The reunion also brings an undeniable intimacy with silence. Silence no longer feels like absence, but presence in its purest form. It carries weight, texture, density. Within it, you begin to feel what mystics call the living stillness, a dynamic equilibrium where energy is utterly calm, yet infinitely potent. In this stillness, thought loses its authority. Words may arise, but they no longer define reality. They serve it. The voice that once narrated experience now listens. Reuniting with the frequency transforms perception of time. The linear sequence that once measured life dissolves into a living continuum. Past and future collapse into a single unfolding presence. You no longer experience moments as separate beads on a string, but as overlapping waves within one ocean of awareness. This timeless perception does not detach you from practical life. Rather, it infuses daily actions with extraordinary clarity. Every movement, every choice feels guided, not by intellect, but by resonance. The body itself begins to respond differently under this influence. Sensations that were once signals of stress become signals of communication. A flutter in the chest, a warmth in the spine, a tingling in the palms. These are not random physiological events, but messages from the field. Your biology speaks the same language as your consciousness. The difference lies only in the level of listening. The more you attune to these subtle signals, the more the dialogue between awareness and matter deepens. There is humility in this reunion, the realization that you do not control the frequency, that you are not its master, but its expression, softens the ego's grip. You begin to move through life as a collaborator with the field, rather than a commander of it. This humility is not weakness. It is freedom from the exhausting illusion of separation. The field carries you, as it always has, but now you are conscious of the movement. In this awareness, gratitude arises naturally. It is not a thought, but a state of resonance, the heart recognizing its own source. Gratitude becomes the tone that amplifies coherence, the emotional bridge between human limitation and quantum intelligence. When gratitude stabilizes, perception becomes luminous. The hidden frequency no longer flickers, it sustains itself as an ongoing hum beneath every experience. Even challenges begin to appear as distortions seeking to rejoin harmony, invitations to realign rather than obstacles to overcome. Ultimately, the reunion with the frequency is the restoration of wholeness. It is the return of attention to its native rhythm, the reawakening of consciousness to the field from which it has never truly departed. There is no ceremony marking its completion, no external sign of arrival. Only a quiet certainty that you are listening again, to the same tone that once called the universe into being, and now calls you home within yourself. The moment the hidden frequency begins to stabilize in consciousness, a silent revolution unfolds within the mind. The familiar architecture of thought, built over years of repetition, conditioning, and emotional residue, starts to tremble. The structures that once defined identity loosen their hold. It feels as though old patterns are dissolving, but what truly happens is more precise. The frequency reveals the gaps between automatic thoughts, and in those gaps, the illusion of control fades. You begin to see that most of what you called thinking was not deliberate creation, but mechanical echo. The dissolution of mental programming is not a violent erasure, but a process of exposure. When the light of coherence enters the system, false structures cannot sustain themselves. Every belief, fear, and narrative begins to reveal its origin. You see the recycled phrases of culture, the inherited limitations from family, the subtle assumptions woven into language itself. They all rise to the surface, asking to be recognized. Awareness does not fight them. It observes them until they lose density. In that observation, the frequency does the work, disassembling the noise without struggle. The old mind resists this process. It fears the emptiness that follows unlearning. It wants to replace one pattern with another, one identity with the next. But the frequency does not negotiate. It dissolves. Its function is not to build a better illusion, but to clear the field so that authentic intelligence can flow through unimpeded. The brain, accustomed to control, interprets this dissolution as loss. Yet what is lost is not real stability. It is the illusion of certainty that kept awareness confined to repetition. When mental programming begins to crumble, time feels unstable. Memories blur, preferences shift, and the sense of me that seemed so solid starts to thin. This can feel disorienting. You may notice moments where you act without the usual commentary, where choice feels spontaneous rather than calculated. These are not lapses of identity. They are glimpses of freedom. The field is moving through you directly, unhindered by the noise of thought. Neuroscience offers a reflection of this process in the brain's capacity for neuroplasticity. As old neural pathways fade through lack of reinforcement, new patterns of coherence arise. This biological flexibility mirrors the spiritual one. Awareness reshapes the circuitry according to its current state of resonance. The dissolution of programming, then, is not destruction. It is renovation. Space is cleared so that a more refined order can inhabit the mind. The emotional landscape transforms alongside it. Repressed experiences surface, not as punishment, but as energy-seeking reintegration. What was once labeled negative reveals itself as incomplete vibration, frozen frequency returning to motion. When you allow emotion to move without resistance, it reintegrates into the flow of coherence. Each wave released restores energy previously trapped in psychological loops. The result is a growing sense of lightness, not through denial but through authenticity. As the noise fades, silence begins to communicate. You start to sense what lies beneath thought, a current of intelligence that doesn't need words. Decisions arise from it effortlessly. The mind no longer races to justify them because their alignment is self-evident. This is what ancient teachers called wisdom, not accumulation of knowledge, but the direct translation of the field into action. To live in this state requires trust, not blind belief, but a steady willingness to let the unknown guide perception. The more you release mental resistance, the more reality organizes itself in harmony with your inner frequency. You start to see how old programming once distorted perception. Fear created confirmation of fear. Scarcity reinforced scarcity. As those patterns dissolve, the field reflects coherence instead of fragmentation. What returns is simplicity, awareness experiencing itself without the interference of conditioned noise. There is a subtle moment in this transition where you realize that the dissolution is not something happening to you, it is happening as you. You are both the observer and the field reorganizing itself. What dies is the habit of seeing life as external. What remains is a clarity that needs no explanation. From that clarity, a new intelligence begins to express through your words, gestures, and relationships. You start to speak with precision rather than defense. You listen not to respond, but to understand. This is the behavior of a mind tuned to coherence, and yet the process continues. The frequency keeps refining perception, stripping away layers that no longer serve the flow. It is not a destination, but an ongoing purification, a dance between light and form. Each moment of surrender deepens the connection, and each act of awareness reinforces the new rhythm. If this description resonates with you, if you have felt the quiet crumbling of old patterns, the soft emptiness before clarity, then you are already in that process. The frequency is working through you. To anchor it more deeply, acknowledge it. Pause for a breath. Feel the space between thoughts right now and notice how alive it is. That stillness is the living proof of dissolution turning into awakening. If this reflection spoke to something in you, allow it to ripple outward. Like a tuning fork meeting another, resonance spreads through attention. Take a moment to like this video and share in the comments the phrase, The old code is dissolving and clarity is awakening. Not as a slogan, but as a declaration of inner alignment, a way to give language to the frequency moving through us all. Once the old mental structures begin to dissolve, the hidden frequency no longer moves through interference. Its rhythm becomes the guiding architecture of perception, and with it comes an extraordinary recognition. Reality itself is not fixed. It responds to coherence. The quantum mind begins to understand that observation is not a passive act of seeing, but an active field of influence. What you perceive as the external world is not separate from the vibration you carry. It is its reflection. The more precise your inner resonance becomes, the more reality reorganizes itself to match that precision. This is the essence of reprogramming reality, not the superficial manipulation of events, but the realignment of perception to the frequency that underlies all phenomena. Every moment you observe without distortion, you rewrite the code of experience. Thought ceases to impose patterns upon the field and instead harmonizes with it. In this harmony, manifestation becomes less about effort and more about resonance. The universe begins to echo your inner order, not because you are commanding it, but because you have stopped contradicting it. At a scientific level, this principle reflects the quantum concept of superposition. Before observation, every particle exists in multiple potential states. The act of measurement collapses those probabilities into a single outcome. But what collapses them is not physical measurement. It is awareness focusing through a specific frequency of coherence. The clearer your frequency, the more defined your reality becomes. The observer effect is not mystical. It is the natural consequence of consciousness interacting with probability. When the quantum mind awakens, it sees that thought is a form of wave interference. Each mental pattern adds or subtracts from the amplitude of potential outcomes. Fear contracts the wave, trust expands it. Attention, when infused with coherence, becomes a sculpting force, shaping the field not through will, but through vibrational alignment. You begin to see how much of your previous life was lived as a reaction to noise, trying to control outcomes without adjusting the inner signal. Now the direction reverses. You no longer chase circumstances, you refine resonance. As this awareness deepens, cause and effect appear to soften. What used to unfold sequentially begins to respond almost instantly to the quality of your perception. Subtle shifts in emotion seem to ripple outward, synchronizing external events with your internal state. To the logical mind, this seems impossible, but to the coherent observer, it is simply natural. Reality has always been fluid, only perception has been rigid. The field does not obey force, it responds to harmony. Reprogramming reality begins with the smallest unit of awareness, the thought. Not by suppression or substitution, but by transmutation. When a thought arises from fear, you recognize it as a distorted frequency and allow it to dissolve in the stillness of attention. What replaces it is not another thought, but a deeper silence from which new patterns of clarity emerge. Over time, the mind stops projecting duality onto experience. The line between inner and outer fades. What happens within becomes inseparable from what happens without. The most astonishing discovery is that reality does not resist this process. It welcomes it. The field is intelligent. It adapts to coherence as water forms around shape. The more transparent you become, the more reality flows into alignment with your essential rhythm. Relationships, timing, opportunities all begin to organize themselves with a grace that feels orchestrated, but is, in truth, the natural expression of balance. This reprogramming does not mean controlling outcomes to satisfy the ego. It is the opposite. Releasing personal will so that the deeper intelligence of the field can express through you. When that happens, the line between manifestation and observation dissolves entirely. Life itself becomes the mirror of your frequency. Every event reveals the next refinement of coherence, every challenge a test of resonance. What once seemed random now appears as part of a grand feedback system, the field showing you exactly what remains out of tune. In this state, choice transforms. You no longer decide through calculation, but through resonance. You feel into possibilities and act from alignment. It's not intuition in the ordinary sense, It's navigation through vibration. You can sense which paths harmonize with your frequency and which carry distortion. Following the coherent path often feels effortless, even if it defies logic. This is not recklessness. It is participation in the intelligence of the field. As the frequency stabilizes, you notice the subtle joy of co-creation. You are not merely shaping your world, you are being shaped by it in return. Each interaction becomes a dialogue between consciousness and its reflection. The act of perceiving becomes sacred. Attention becomes the tool through which the infinite experiments with form. There is no separation between creator and creation, only the continuous reprogramming of the field through awareness. Reprogramming reality, then, is not a technique, it is a state of coherence. It arises when the observer and the observed merge into one rhythm. The universe does not need to be persuaded to align with your intention, it already wants to. Your only task is to match the purity of its vibration, to hold awareness steady enough for the field to reveal its order. When you live from this frequency, miracles lose their name. They become ordinary expressions of natural law operating without interference. The improbable becomes effortless, and the impossible becomes simply unrecognized potential, waiting for coherence. The quantum mind no longer asks, "How do I make reality change?" It rests in the deeper knowing. Reality is already listening. It always has been, and it speaks fluently in the language of resonance. When the mind begins to resonate consistently with the hidden frequency, perception undergoes a quiet revolution. The senses, once limited to decoding the material world, start to register subtler dimensions of reality. The shift is not in the objects observed, but in the observer's capacity to perceive. The eyes still see form, but beneath form they begin to detect movement, vibrational currents linking everything. The ear still hears sound, but within the silence between notes it perceives the rhythm of space itself. Quantum perception does not replace ordinary seeing. It deepens it until every fragment of the world glows with unseen coherence. In the early stages of this expansion, the mind tries to interpret the new input through its old filters. It seeks explanation and definition, attempting to categorize sensations that do not fit within familiar logic. Yet quantum perception cannot be mapped through linear thought. It unfolds when the intellect releases its authority and allows awareness to experience directly. The moment you stop trying to define what you perceive, perception multiplies. The field begins to reveal its fractal nature, layers within layers, each reflecting the same intelligence in differing degrees of density. The expansion feels less like acquiring new abilities and more like remembering how to see. The boundaries between perception and energy blur. You begin to sense emotional textures in others without words, to feel the architecture of a space before entering it, to recognize patterns of probability before they solidify into events. This is not imagination but sensitivity, consciousness perceiving its own resonance through extended channels of awareness. In this state, intuition evolves from occasional flashes into a continuous stream of relational knowing. Science offers subtle reflections of this process in the study of entanglement. When two particles become correlated, their states remain linked across distance and time. A change in one is reflected instantaneously in the other. Quantum perception mirrors this principle on a human scale. Awareness recognizes that everything it perceives is entangled with it. You feel a shift in the collective field when consciousness expands somewhere else in the world. You sense the emotional signature of an event before it reaches your physical environment. The boundaries of perception stretch beyond geography and time. As this awareness matures, the notion of external reality begins to dissolve. Space is no longer a container. It is a medium of communication. You experience the air not as emptiness, but as living intelligence, transmitting information constantly. The body becomes an instrument of translation, skin sensing temperature, heart sensing coherence, mind sensing probability. Each system works as part of a larger symphony through which the field speaks in countless tones. The expansion is not abstraction, it is embodiment at its highest precision. This transformation also affects how you experience selfhood. The I that once identified with the body and biography expands to include the entire field of perception. You no longer locate yourself behind the eyes, but within the totality of awareness. The sense of separation gives way to participation. The trees you walk past are not background. They are active presences, communicating through resonance. The city's pulse, the wind's rhythm, even silence itself become part of your extended nervous system. You begin to feel existence as one continuous organism. With this expanded perception comes responsibility. To perceive the interconnection of all things means to feel the consequence of every thought and action. The field mirrors intention instantly, not as punishment, but as education. You begin to act with precision, because carelessness becomes impossible. Compassion ceases to be a moral stance and becomes an energetic necessity. Hurting another feels like static within your own resonance. Harmony, then, is not an ethical ideal, but the most natural state of coherence within the unified field. Quantum perception also reveals the illusion of randomness. What once appeared accidental begins to display underlying geometry. Synchronicities multiply, but they no longer surprise you. They confirm alignment. Each event, no matter how trivial, carries encoded information. A phrase overheard, a fleeting encounter, a delay, all operate as signals within the greater matrix. Awareness decodes them, not through analysis, but through resonance. You feel the meaning rather than think it. Life becomes a dialogue between consciousness and its reflection, each experience a subtle message from the field to itself. The expansion of perception does not remove you from ordinary reality, it integrates you more deeply into it. You still live within the same world, but your way of being in it transforms. Mundane moments acquire depth. Washing dishes becomes a sensory meditation on reflection and motion. Walking through a crowd becomes an exercise in collective energy navigation. You realize that awareness does not require exotic conditions, it only requires coherence. Every moment holds the same access point to infinity. At this stage, language begins to fail. Words cannot contain the precision of direct experience. You may find yourself speaking less, not out of withdrawal, but because silence communicates more effectively. The expansion of perception makes you a transmitter of presence rather than information. Others feel coherence through you, even without explanation. Communication moves beyond words into vibration, an unspoken dialogue between frequencies. Ultimately, quantum perception is the mind remembering its own vastness. It is not an achievement, but a return to the natural state of consciousness unconfined by conditioning. Through it, you begin to live as both wave and observer, aware of the infinite network connecting every form, yet centered in the still point from which all motion arises. The hidden frequency, once faint, now permeates perception entirely. You no longer seek to tune into it. You realize you are it, perceiving itself in infinite detail, expanding endlessly through the awareness that gives it form. Resonance is the language through which the mind and the field recognize each other. It is not metaphorical, but literal. Every thought, every emotion, every act of attention generates a vibrational signature that interacts with the wider field of reality. When the frequency of the mind matches the coherence of the field, information flows freely, and life begins to organize itself around harmony rather than struggle. This is not an act of imagination. It is the underlying mechanism by which consciousness and matter dance together in the architecture of existence. Resonance does not depend on belief. It is an inherent property of reality. Just as a tuning fork begins to vibrate when exposed to another of the same pitch, the mind vibrates in response to the frequencies it encounters. Most people experience this unconsciously, the tension felt in the presence of conflict, the calm induced by stillness, the intuitive pull toward certain people or places. These are expressions of resonance at work. What changes in the awakened state is awareness. You begin to sense the precise frequencies operating beneath every encounter, every thought, every decision. The hidden frequency that awakens the quantum mind acts as a stabilizing tone in this vast orchestra of resonance. It harmonizes the chaotic signals of the nervous system with the subtle order of the field. When the mind attunes to it, inner turbulence gives way to clarity, and that clarity radiates outward, restructuring the energetic landscape around you. This is not mystical influence but coherent feedback. The field mirrors the state of its observer. The mind is both transmitter and receiver, shaping and shaped by the same universal vibration. Resonance reveals that consciousness is not confined to the skull. It extends into the field like a pattern of waves interacting with the geometry of existence. Every cell in the body participates in this interaction. The heart's electromagnetic pulse, for example, extends several feet beyond the skin, synchronizing with the brain's oscillations. When these rhythms fall into coherence, they generate a frequency pattern that aligns with the Earth's own electromagnetic field. The human organism becomes a living bridge between biology and cosmos, translating the intelligence of the universe into the language of experience. The deeper this resonance becomes, the more effortless life feels. Events align with inner intention before words are formed. Conversations flow as if choreographed. Even obstacles appear not as resistance, but as recalibration, moments when the field adjusts your trajectory to maintain coherence. In this state, action arises spontaneously from awareness rather than planning. You move not because you decide to, but because the field moves through you, expressing itself as clarity in motion. Resonance also transforms perception of relationship. When two people meet, their fields interact, creating interference patterns that either amplify or distort their individual frequencies. Harmony feels like recognition, an unspoken understanding that transcends logic. Disharmony feels like friction, the body tightening as two signals fail to align. The awakened mind observes this dynamic without judgment, adjusting its own frequency instead of trying to control the other. In doing so, it restores balance to the shared field. True connection is not the merging of identities, but the synchronization of vibration. At the planetary scale, collective resonance determines the tone of civilization. Every act of awareness contributes to the frequency of the whole. When enough individuals align with coherence, cultural paradigms begin to shift. Innovation, empathy, and creativity arise spontaneously, as if humanity itself were tuning toward a higher octave. The hidden frequency, once personal, becomes social, environmental, even cosmic, a unifying intelligence moving through many minds as one field. Yet resonance requires continual refinement. The mind is dynamic. It drifts out of tune whenever fear, distraction, or resistance re-emerge. The field does not punish this misalignment, it simply reflects it. When life feels chaotic, when relationships strain or synchronicities fade, the feedback is immediate. The inner tone has wavered. The remedy is not to fight the distortion, but to listen more deeply. Silence becomes the tuning space. In stillness, the original frequency reasserts itself, and the field responds in kind. This interplay between mind and field mirrors the principle of quantum coherence in physics. Systems that share phase alignment behave as a single unit, exchanging energy and information with perfect efficiency. Similarly, when the human mind attunes to the field, separation collapses. Energy flows without friction. Insight arises without analysis. The universe and the observer become a single process of awareness, experiencing itself through different scales of vibration. In this recognition, the purpose of consciousness becomes clear. It is not to dominate or escape the physical world, but to resonate with it so completely that no distinction remains between thought and manifestation. The field, infinite and neutral, responds to frequency, not desire. It amplifies what is coherent and dissolves what is not. To live in resonance is to align your vibration with truth, not moral truth, but vibrational integrity. Every thought that harmonizes with coherence strengthens the bridge between the visible and the invisible. Eventually, the mind ceases to perceive the field as something external. The distinction fades until perception itself becomes resonance, awareness vibrating within awareness. This is the essence of the quantum relationship between consciousness and creation. The field dreams through the mind, and the mind echoes the dream back into form. In that perfect symmetry, experience stops being a story unfolding in time and becomes a single continuous note, the eternal sound of reality resonating with itself. You are not searching for the frequency, You are remembering it. Every moment of silence, every breath taken with awareness, vibrates with the same intelligence that moves galaxies. The quantum mind was never asleep. Only attention was turned outward, forgetting the vast field humming within. Now, that field is awake in you, pulsing through thought, sensation, and space itself. Reality listens when you are coherent. Life bends toward harmony when you stand in stillness. The hidden frequency is not a secret anymore. It is your natural state reclaiming its rhythm through presence. If you reach this point, write in the comments, "The frequency is awake in me." And if this message resonated, subscribe to continue exploring the depths of consciousness and the quantum field together.